What's up, everybody? This is your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga, here to bring you another video with no frills, just the analysis. And today I'm going to be bringing you the Season 3, Episode 2 review of The Walking Dead entitled Sick. And this episode was appropriately named because Rick is sick. Had to give you a little rhyme there. Freestyle for you. But seriously though, I was and it's somewhat prophetic what I said in my last review, because I talked about how Rick looked like he was losing his edge, looked like from a psychological standpoint he was a little bit off kilter. And I was actually watching last week's episode before this week's episode came on, and I happened to catch it right at the end where Hershel gets bit. And Rick doesn't hesitate. He pulls out the axe and just starts chopping off Hershel's leg. And I said that scene just looked like Rick wasn't right. And man, woof, did Rick do some grimy stuff in this episode. Oh man. But in any event, I'm loving the pacing of these first two episodes. Really action-packed. I mean, who doesn't like an action-packed zombie thriller with all the blood and gore that we've come to expect from The Walking Dead? So I'm really loving the action-packed pacing so far. And I just also, before I get into this week's summary and analysis, I just have to talk a little bit about Beth. I think that's her name, Hershel's other daughter besides Maggie, Beth and Carl. Somebody else picked up on this in the comment section of my last video, and they were talking about how, what do I think about the relationship between Beth and Carl? If I could put it simply, I would state it this way. It's weird and inexplicable. And leave it at that. On to my summary and analysis of this week's episode. So, we learned that the people at the end of the last episode who we saw looking at the group through that grate thing are actually prisoners of the prison. And they're obviously spooked. They don't know what the hell is going on. And we come to find out that they're completely ignorant of what's been going on in the world at large outside of the prison. So they're prisoners and they have guns, they have weapons, and so they come out from behind the grate, and immediately there's this sort of confrontational standoff between the group on one hand, I've kind of named Rick's clan the group, and the prisoners. And so they don't have time to really confront each other because Rick and T-Dog and everybody there, they're hurrying up. They're trying to get Hershel out of there because they don't want him to bleed to death right there on the floor. And so Daryl's kind of watching everybody's back with this little bow and arrow thing he's got there. And so they rush Hershel back through the prison pathways that they just came through, and they get him back to a bed, and they try and get some sheets or towels wrapped around his leg stump so that he doesn't, bleed to death. And the prisoners attempt to follow them back out to where the group is, and T-Dog and Daryl confront them and say, listen, you got to turn back. We can't allow you to come any further out here. And it looks like things are about to get really ugly, but then Rick comes to the rescue, and he shows up, and this is when the prisoners finally learn what's happened and what's going on. And we also get a very key piece of information in this scene. So Rick basically explains to them, listen, there's no cell phones, there's no computers, half the human population is wiped out. And when he said half the human population, I'm thinking that was a very, 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 very conservative estimate. Because if you look out in the world, it doesn't look like half the population is still alive. I mean, it looks like more than half the population has been wiped out in this zombie apocalypse. Be that as it may, he explains to the prisoners, we're in the middle of a post-apocalyptic situation with a bunch of freaking zombies. And then the prisoners, they're obviously spooked. They're shocked that what the hell's going on. And they give us a key piece of information. They tell us that they've been trapped inside the prison in the cafeteria part of the prison for, I think one prisoner said, like 292 days. So that's somewhere around 10 months. So it looks like from the time Rick woke up in the hospital in the very first episode up until now, it looks like only about 10 months, approximately 10 months have elapsed. Maybe give or take a month or two more. So, yeah, this whole situation has transpired. The world has basically been turned upside down in less than a year. Less than a year. Things have gone batshit crazy. And after this scene, we get a key piece of foreshadowing. So the prisoners, there's this confrontation between the group and the prisoners are asserting that they want to retake the prison. That you guys just got here. We've been here. We're prisoners here. We want to take over the prison. And Rick attempts to negotiate with them in a sort of bartering way. They say, okay, Rick says, okay, you've been trapped in the cafeteria for about 10 months. Obviously, you've had to have survived somewhere. You have to have food back there. So here's what we'll do. This prison is big enough for both of us. You can give us half of your remaining food supply, and in exchange, we'll give you some weapons. We'll show you how to fight the zombies, and we'll even help you clear out an entirely new cell block so you can be segregated from us so that we don't have to even cross paths. The prisoners say, all right, they don't really want to give up their food, but they're like, we don't really have any other choice. Okay, we'll take you up on that offer. And it's at this point in this sort of confrontational standoff that I start to think about the possibility of what might happen should things heat up between the prisoners and the group. And I start seriously thinking about whether or not Rick might have to kill these people. Basically, that he might have to kill these people. And like I said, there's a key bit of foreshadowing here, because after this scene, there's another scene where Rick and Lori are talking. And Rick is talking about precisely this sort of eventuality. And Lori says, what are your options? And then Rick responds, kill him? And then Lori responds, if that's what you think is best. And then my response was, really? Really? Is Rick gonna have to get gangster on these people? I mean, is he gonna have to show these prisoners what the Ricktatorship is all about? But anyway, we start to see, in a very, very real, visceral sense, in a very real way, the implications of Rick's character transformation that sort of started at the tail end of last season. Now his characterization is fully coming to fruition, or at least it seems like the implications of his character transformation are coming to fruition. And the main problem that I always had with Rick in the first season, just to do somewhat of a general appraisal of Rick's characterization. My main problem with Rick is that he always seemed to be engaging in this sort of black and white view of looking at the world, and engaging in this sort of black and white view of morality. But the circumstances have changed tremendously, especially since the end of the first season. I mean, forget the fact that they were in a post-apocalyptic zombie situation. By the end of the first season, he's had to kill his best friend. And so, once the circumstances change, it's either you change along with the circumstances, or you leave yourself open to be killed by not just the zombies, but anybody else on the road that you happen to meet. Remember what happened in the bar, and I think episode like 9 or 10 of last season. But from a moral standpoint, Rick's thinking is not bad. It's just that once there's a conflict between your thinking and the way the world now works, if you continue to engage in that sort of black and white thinking, you will be killed. And that's the essential struggle for Rick's humanity that he's engaging in throughout this series, about how much he should allow his circumstances in this post-apocalyptic zombie situation to influence his morality and to change his perception of ethics. That's his struggle for humanity at this point. And this is why I looked at him in the last episode and thought to myself, there's only so much that a person can take. There's only so much a person can stretch before they snap. And that's why I said he looked off kilter. And that seems to be borne out by what happens throughout the rest of this episode. So, yeah. And the problem is that the normal rules of society have been suspended in such a way that you cannot trust other people. So even if you yourself decide to be moral, you can't trust that other people will reciprocate your perception of morality. And this was, again, another problem with Dale about his whole speech about we're the last lights of civilization and we have an obligation to act with some humanity and all that other blah, blah, blah stuff. And this is what I said in last season. Being human has to be more than being alive or surviving. But once you're in this situation, what other choice do you have? The only thing that these people are doing now is surviving. They're not human in any meaningful way. And that's what Rick's character transformation symbolizes. Him having to give up what he perceives to be an essential aspect of his humanity simply so he can survive. But from my standpoint, if all you can do is survive, then you're not human in any meaningful way. So now let's talk about what happens in this episode with the prisoners. So Rick goes back to the cafeteria where the prisoners have been hiding out, and he takes their food, and then he's going to help them, clear out a cell block for themselves so that the prisoners in the group don't have to really be affiliated with each other. And they go into the cell block and they start sweeping, trying to clear out the areas. And at first, the prisoners, it's obvious they don't know what the hell's going on. They just go and just wildly start attacking the walkers. And in the process of this, one of the prisoners actually gets cut on his back and he gets infected. He has to be killed. No other way to deal with that situation. He's killed off. And it's at this point that things really start to go batshit crazy in this episode. So they've cleared out a portion of a cell block, and then they're about to enter, or at least the prison pathways to get to a cell block. And they're about to go into the cell block so that they can clear it out. And Rick tells one of the prisoners, I don't even know if this guy had a name, but he tells one of the prisoners, make sure you only open one door because we don't know what's behind this door. We need to make sure that it's safe for everybody, and we need to be sure that we can properly assess the situation so that we know how to proceed. The guy messes around and he opens both doors, and a flood of walkers comes in. A group of walkers comes in. So everybody's fighting for their lives, literally. They're killing the walkers. They're trying to clear out this cell block. And one of the guys pushes a walker into Rick. Rick falls over. The walker's trying to get at him, and Daryl has to save him. And then Rick is laying there, and then he gets up, and then he looks at the guy, basically like, what the hell's going on? And then the guy's like, well, shit happens. And then there's a pause where Rick and the prisoner are standing toe to toe. And there's just a pause. And you can see it on Rick's face that he's considering his options. And notice, we've already had the scene with Lori when she asks him, what are your options? And Rick says, kill him. And so Rick is standing there. And then out of nowhere, he brings up the machete, slices this guy right in the head, right through his skull. And at first, it seems so surreal because it's so out of character with Rick. And he could have gone about the situation in another way. For example, they could have cleared out the cell block and then he could have shot the guy, knowing what kind of grimy person he was. But to cut a person in the head with a machete, that's a real personal way to kill somebody. I mean, with a gun, you shoot them kind of impersonal. With a blade, with a machete, you actually have to slice into their head. Very personal way to kill a person. Very up close and personal. So the two guys who are the other three guys remaining in the group, two of them, they look like they want to do something. Daryl and T-Dog automatically raise their weapons like, hold up, you got to calm all that down. The other guy starts running away. Rick chases him down, chases the man down, goes after him. The guy runs in his panic. He runs out of the prison and he runs into the prison yard that's filled with walkers. And Rick goes to run after him, but then he comes back and he closes the gate. And the guy runs, realizing that he's now surrounded by walkers. He tries to run back into the prison. And Rick looks at him and he says, "You best run." Wow. And he leaves the guy out in the prison yard full of walkers. And Rick closes the door, and as he's turning to walk away, you can hear the guy screaming as the walkers are, we know what's happening to him. He's being eaten alive, basically. Now, think about this situation and try to compare it to the Shane and Otis situation. See, this is why the writing of this series is so good. This scene is remarkably similar, strikingly similar to the Shane and Otis situation, where Shane shoots Otis, leaves him behind so that he can get away. And it's not exactly the same, but the same fundamentals apply. Where, I mean, Rick didn't have to kill that guy. He didn't have to leave him out there to be killed. In the next scene, we see that he lets the other two prisoners get away. He takes them to their cell block, leaves them there. But this other guy, he just leaves them out there to be eaten by the walkers. Now, for all of you people who in last season were talking about, oh, Shane is immoral, he's a psychopath, he's a sociopath, he's crazy. Think about what Shane did to Otis for his own survival. And now compare that to this situation with what Rick did to this other guy. And that's not even the guy who pushed the walker into him. So now let's look at Rick's character in context. In the first episode, there was a similar situation between Randall and Herschel, where Randall fell on the gate and Rick was very reluctant to cut his leg off. And in last episode, he had no hesitation with cutting off Herschel's leg. Now, we get to a situation where he's left a man outside to be eaten alive by walkers. Now, I'm not saying he's exactly like Shane, but no one can deny the sort of arc of his characterization is taking him in that direction. And I really love the writing here because it's forcing you to compare a character who you sympathize with, Rick, and compare his actions to a character that you don't sympathize with, Shane. And then try to do some sort of moral evaluation with respect to their characters. So the writing is very, very good because they're using Rick's characterization in a very, very deft way to explore the dark side of human psychology and of ethics in this post-apocalyptic situation. And I think it's just absolutely fabulous. And that would be something that the people who were all over Shane about now have to consider with respect to Rick. But besides this, that was the main meat and potatoes of the episode. But besides that, I have to ask this question. What the hell are the writers doing with Lori? What are they doing with Lori? Her characterization is just all over the place, wildly inconsistent. I mean, she was back and forth in the first season. First trying to goad Rick into killing Shane, then treating him like a pariah when he finally kills Shane. Now in this episode, she's talking about I wouldn't win any Mother of the Year awards, and on top of that, she's still not watching after Carl. He goes off on his own again in this episode. I mean, what are they doing with Lori's character? I mean, at this point, she's just literally a useless appendage. She provides nothing substantial to this series. Nothing whatsoever. Another thing, before I wrap this review up. One thing that I realized while I was watching this episode, and particularly while I was watching this scene with Maggie, where she's hovering over Hershel, she's obviously distraught, distressed, supposed to be a very touching and moving scene, correct? I realized something while watching this scene. I realized I don't have any emotional connection to these people whatsoever. Now, that isn't to say that I don't sympathize with them, because I do. But I don't feel any close emotional connection to these characters whatsoever, except maybe minimally Rick, Daryl, and Andrea. But besides that, T-Dog to me is lame. Hershel, I always thought he was a fake Christian, said that multiple times. And Maggie and Glenn are like, whatever, right? And I think the main reason why I don't have any real emotional connection to these people, not just because of the fact that they could die at any moment, but because I think that in some sense they're deeply irrational. And here's what I mean by that. Me personally, and I've said this before, if I was in this situation, I would have stayed behind with Dr. Jenner and committed suicide. I would have killed myself off. There's no point in being in this post-apocalyptic situation. And what's very interesting to me is that I think that killing yourself in this situation is probably the most rational thing to do. But what's interesting is that a lot of people disagree with me. And that one of the characters who was so against suicide, Dale, he wound up getting his stomach ripped open. And now, these people, in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, clinging to the last vestiges of their humanity. There's really none left because, like I said, all they're doing is surviving. And so I guess the question is, would you rather die on your own terms, preserving some shred of your own humanity, or would you rather get your stomach ripped open like Dale? Or engage in a sort of ethical and psychological self-mutilation like Rick is doing now? I mean, what would you rather be doing is the question. I find that because I perceive their actions to be so irrational that it actually impedes me having an emotional connection to these characters. I can't understand why anybody would continue to live in this sort of situation. Maybe somebody in the comment section can explain it to me, because I think that these people are just deeply irrational. Although I'm still willing to watch this series because I find the situation so compelling that even though I think they're irrational, I find the writing that's being done here deeply, deeply, deeply compelling. And that's the reason why I continue to watch these people. And I think it's interesting to watch them in the same way that watching a train wreck is also interesting. And we all know how train wrecks end. And that's how I think this series is going to end. It has to be bad. It can't possibly be good. I mean, unless there's some sort of plot device that's going to be introduced later on, I don't see how this can end well for any of the characters in this series. So that's pretty much it for this review. Oh, also, one final thing. Carol was clearly being watched at the end of this episode, and I'm thinking, actually, I don't know who the hell was watching her. I don't know at all. I'm thinking that perhaps it's somebody from Woodbury. Not really sure. I know Woodbury is going to be featured in this season, so I'm assuming that the person who was watching Carol is a person from Woodbury. So really excited and looking forward to next week's episode. So this was your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga. Just brought you another video with no frills, just the analysis. Peace and have a blessed day.